Big stick diplomacy. That's what we're going to talk about today on Alpha Male Podcast. The podcast where we talk about what it means to be a man the right way, with God at the center, Judeo-Christian values, and real-world first-hand experience. Sometimes I plan episodes way in advance. Sometimes I'm driving to Winco, gun store to pick up ammo, and Petco to pick up dog food, and an episode comes to me. Thus is the case today. I'm familiar with this. Likely you may be familiar with big stick diplomacy. I've been working really hard on another episode for Gunfighter Life. I imagine if you listen to this podcast, you listen to Gunfighter Life, but maybe not always. I do another podcast, Gunfighter Life, working really hard on an episode on real practical gunfighting training for the dedicated armed citizen. And thinking about that and kind of the whole philosophy, this big stick diplomacy popped into my head. Commonly attributed to Theodore Roosevelt, Teddy. As Taylor Swift fans may call him T. Dizzle. As Walking Dead fans may call him the original T-Dog. Theodore Roosevelt, one of my favorite presidents. A gunfighter, a warfighter, a hunter. Was involved in this whole movement you might want to look into if you like this podcast. Muscular Christianity. I like the sound of that. Muscular Christianity. Again, you might want to look up that Muscular Christianity movement. I wish it would come back. In fact, for a time, the subtitle of this podcast was Alpha Male Podcast, Muscular Christianity. But anyway, Theodore Roosevelt, perhaps the only president I can think of that I like more, Andrew Jackson, also a gunfighter. He was in so many gunfights. He died not of the acute from the gunshot wound, but as I understand, he was shot so many times. He died of the chronic lead poisoning from the projectiles that had been put into his body from gunfights. That's a warrior. That's a gunfighter right there. Talk about grit. Talk about determination. Those are presidents from days of yore. Consider how much we've changed, especially what we change in value as a nation. Because there are still those gunfighters out there. There are plenty. We just got through a 20-year-long war, a GWOT, which I played a small part. But we have plenty of real manly gunfighters around, but they're not the ones that are president. Anyway, without getting too far off topic, Teddy, Theodore Roosevelt, big stick diplomacy. Walk softly and carry a big stick. Walk softly and carry a big stick. What a notion, what a concept, what a great idea, Theodore Roosevelt. I say again, walk softly and carry a big stick. Let me paint you a little picture here. Any man, any culture, walking on a path in a natural environment. Picture whatever you want. Woods, desert, suburbia. Angry dog comes out from behind whatever, a tree. Said man has a fraction of a second to respond. First picture this man unarmed. This dog is going to attack. He's not just barking. He's bent on biting. This man is unarmed. What does he do? Now, same scenario. The man is carrying a big stick. There's a reason these kind of walking sticks are common throughout many cultures. Whether you're talking about England or Scotland or the Middle East with a Bedouin, walking sticks are a common thing. Trekking poles are still a common thing if you want to go ultra modern. But now you give this man a big stick and he has a fraction of a second to respond. Whereas before, he didn't have a lot of options. Now he actually has that fight or flight option. He can still fight unarmed, but he's probably going to get bit. Probably going to get injured. And I don't think it's that hard to defeat an angry dog, but you're probably going to get bit in the process. With the big stick, you kind of eliminate that. I also remember a Jack London book this brings to mind that I read, 25 or some-ish years ago, and I don't remember if it was called The Wild, and I don't remember, or it could have been White Fang. However, there was a thing I remember from those books that this brought to mind. Something like the law of the club and the fang. You give that man the stick, and he has a chance to not be a victim, even if he fights with that dog, because most men can't outrun most dogs. Now he has a chance to not just defend himself and win, but much better chance at walk softly and carry a big stick. Now this man, I shouldn't have to say, should not walk around looking for dogs to beat with his stick. But if a dog comes out and needs it, he can give it a wallop. Again, needs it. There's that walk softly, right? You don't look for issues. Going to tell you a little bit about my background. I grew up a heathen, and I fought a lot. And I actually kind of like fighting. I never was one to shy away from violence, especially when I was a heathen. And not only did I use violence when it was warranted, I used violence, honestly, just sometimes because I enjoyed it. I got in so many fights as a adolescent when I was old enough to know better. I remember one time one of my friends was poking me with his finger or with a stick, I don't remember, and I said, do that one more time. And he did it one more time, and let's just say I hurt him. Overreacting is an understatement. One time was playing rugby, and there are no real rules in rugby like soccer or football, like, you get a timeout, you get a card. I remember, even though I didn't need to, I was on top of this kid, pummeling him with my fists. Honestly, just because I enjoyed it. That's not cool. That is not what I'm talking about here. I was wrong in that. I should not have done that. I think you should know and be acquainted with violence, but that violates that walk softly part. Walk softly. Carry a big stick. If violence is needed, warranted, justified, I've got no problem dishing it out. It's a lot easier with a big stick, whatever that is. And I do a whole other episode called Gunfighter Life, but whatever that is for you, whatever you can have. We touched briefly on muscular Christianity. Let's talk about the Bible, right? Because the Bible has many, many justifiable cases for use of force. You shall not murder. Murder. Unjustified use of force. But there are plenty of justifiable uses of force, up to and including deadly force, prescribed. How about Genesis 9? Whoever sheds the blood of a man, by man shall his blood be shed. For God made man in his own image. Or how about this one? Sadly topical. Kidnappers. You know this prescription for kidnappers? They shall die. You hear that, Hamas? They shall die. That's the prescription for a kidnapper. Death. And there are many justifiable uses of force, up to and including deadly force. Let's talk about Jesus. And I don't do this lightly. In fact, I'm going to send this out to the inner tribe, the patrons, first, to make sure I'm not off base here, not make sure I'm not misrepresenting, because that's a dangerous thing. I do not want to use the Bible to promote stuff that's not biblical, that's not in line with the actual teaching. I think you can go both ways in this. I think you could be some beta male that tries to justify with the Bible that use of force is never okay and never ever authorized. And I think you could also use it to justify, if you skew it and take it out of context, violence when it's not justified. I don't want to be guilty of either one of them. I want to look circumspectly and soberly. Let's look to Christ, the Word made flesh. The words that we just read, and all the words made flesh. Jesus told his disciples, let he who has no sword sell his cloak and buy one. You'll find that in the Gospel of Luke. Yes, Jesus told his disciples to have swords. Swords, not butter knives, not a Swiss Army knife, a sword. A sword is a weapon. Jesus told his disciples, "He who has no sword, let him sell his cloak and buy one." Carry a big stick, if you will. Carry a big stick. Now, when he was being arrested, Peter takes out that sword and cuts off a man's ear. Jesus tells him to put it in his sheath, not throw it away, not burn it, not, ew, weapons are bad, violence is bad. He told him to put it in his sheath where it belonged. Walk softly. That was not the time. Was Jesus not to drink the cup that his Father had for him to drink? Yes, he was. He had just earnestly prayed about that in the garden. That was what he was there to do, to accomplish. It is finished. On the cross, on his death and resurrection, that was not the time to stand up in violence. But he told his disciples to have swords, but not to use them unjustifiably. Walk softly and carry a big stick. Carry a big stick, comma, walk softly. Now there is a time and a place to not respond with violence, even to martyrdom, even to death, like Jesus, like Stephen. But I submit there are plenty of times where it is okay and the most loving thing you can do to respond with violence. If you've heard my bio before, you might surmise I have a little bit of training and experience with a firearm. I carry a firearm pretty much everywhere, minus like the airport. And it's been a long time since I've been on a plane. But let's put it to you this way. I don't have a TV. I don't generally go out to a movie. But let's say I went out to a movie with my wife. We're in a movie theater. And an active shooter breaks out. And somebody starts just shooting people. Bodies hitting the floor. One after another. Bang. Dead body. Bang. Injured body. Bang. Dead body. One right after another. Is it the most loving thing that I can do is to sit there and maybe curl up in a ball and suck my thumb? Or is the most loving thing that I can do my part to fulfill the word of God? Whoever sheds the blood of a man, by man shall his blood be shed. For God made man in his own image. Right? Wouldn't it be more loving for me to change that person's behavior, stop him from taking life by taking his life? Not a great option, but it's the best option available. And I would hope that even if I had no guns, even if I had nothing, even if I was a one-armed man, that I would run up and try and stop that man. But it's a lot easier if I carry a big stick. Big stick diplomacy. This was kind of Teddy Roosevelt, and I think he came up with a philosophy, who knows, but it's commonly attributed to him. I guess it doesn't really matter. He meant this for like a nation. I think it's important for a nation. You mess with me, you get the stick. You mess with me, you get a beat down, talking as a country. Well, I don't think we've been adhering to this for quite a while, but if this was in fact still our philosophy, like, hey, we got a mighty army, we got a mighty navy, we got a lot of swords here. You come at me like a rabid dog, you're going to get the stick. A lot more stick than you can handle. It's good for a nation, good for a community, good for a church. Hey, you're welcome here, we walk softly. You're welcome in the church. You plan on doing violence at this church? You plan on shedding a man's blood at this church? By man, your blood's gonna be shed. Walk softly, carry a big stick. Also, most germane of what I was thinking of for this topic, it makes sense for the individual. Walk softly, not like me in my heathen days. Walk softly and carry a big stick. For some people, the biggest stick they can carry may be a knife. It may be an EDC pocket knife. For some, and even if you can normally carry a knife or a gun, you might only be able to have hand-to-hand. I think if this resonates with you, and when Jesus said this, let he who has no sword sell his cloak and buy one, his disciples said, see, here are 2 swords. And he said, it is enough. Now, there were 12 disciples. They already had swords. They weren't at home, so they obviously were carrying them somehow. And again, I don't want to read too much into the Bible. So maybe not every man. I don't know, because it resonates with me. But I'm reminded of that movie Hacksaw Ridge. I would never, ever, ever call that man a coward. He was an incredibly brave man. He was also a pacifist, right? And that was his conviction, and I'm not going to tell him he was wrong for that. But clearly not everybody is called to be a pacifist. If you think you are not called to be a pacifist and to use force, you ought to be acquainted with force and violence. You ought to know how to throw a punch and get punched in the face and not freak out. You ought to know how to kick. You ought to know how to grapple. You ought to know how to use a knife. And if able, possible, prudent, carry and train with a firearm. I'm going to do a whole other podcast for that. But walk softly and carry a big stick. I guess in starting to bring the tray tables up for landing on this episode, Jesus, going back, it should all, Jesus. God is number one in my life and everything that I do, and it should be in my philosophy and my use of force, everything, right? Think about this. I'm not going to quote it verbatim, but the disciples are with Jesus, and there's a town that doesn't do what they're supposed to do, and the disciples say, should we call down fire from heaven? And he rebukes them for it. Also, there's another time when people are coming at Jesus, and he chooses not to use force. He says, don't you know I could call down legions of angels? Think about what a couple of angels did to Sodom and Gomorrah. He's called the Lord God of hosts. Hosts may not mean anything to you, but it means, if you look it up, the God of angel armies. Look at what a couple of angels did to Sodom and Gomorrah. They wrecked that place. If Jesus wanted to, at any time, he could call down legions of angels. But once again, he stays his hand. Power with restraint. There was another time where Jesus made a whip and drove people out of the temple. Now, I don't want to add to the text, right? I don't want to add to it. But a whip is a whip. Whip is used for whipping. Now, I don't know if he only whipped animals. Did he whip animals and people? Did he just crack it in the air? Did he just use it as a motivator? Did he actually strike people? He certainly overturned tables. I don't know. I don't want to add to the text. But, people, what would Jesus do? Well, sometimes he'd make a whip and use it. Also, I don't want to use the Bible, or I think it's wrong for anybody to use the Bible and say that you should never use violence as a Christian, as whatever. I think, again, blanket statement for everybody, that would be a misuse of the text, trying to put in there what you want. Just like when I was a Marine/soldier, I had missions. Sometimes our missions were to locate, close with, and destroy the enemy by fire and maneuver. Sometimes our missions were humanitarian, right? But a good soldier accomplishes the mission. Jesus' mission was to die on the cross for the redemption of our eternal souls, right? That was his mission then. When he comes back, because he comes again, right? We should all be watching and waiting for his return. It is written in the book of Revelation. People are crying out for the mountains, fall on them and hide them from the wrath of the Lamb. That's Christ. He comes back with a vengeance, the wrath of the Lamb. If a couple of angels destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah, laid it waste, the wrath of the Lamb, that should make you pause and be in awe. The wrath of the Lamb. That's Jesus. He comes back and he has wrath. So, and again, with closing, we should all be circumspect. And I say, don't be quick to use violence. But let's not make violence a four-letter word. I think a lot of today's culture and society and beta males try and paint violence as something that's always bad. Malum in se, it's not malum in se. Violence may be malum prohibitum in certain circumstances, but it's not evil by nature, because God uses violence many times. We're not perfect, but God is our perfect example. He uses violence many times. He uses it the right way. Every time God dishes out violence and wrath, Sodom and Gomorrah, the plagues of Egypt, the wrath of the Lamb in Revelation, it is just and good. Therefore, I submit there is no way that violence is malum in se. If you were acting the right way at the right time for the right reasons, in step with the Word of God. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. With that, my thoughts on big stick diplomacy. I usually close with a tactical tip of the day and a tactical verse of the day. today I used my wife's debit card for something. I noticed she did not sign the back. Now, I didn't go through a bio in here, but I was also a police officer, law enforcement officer. If you have a debit card, credit card, and you have not signed it, you may want to do so. Here's why. Somebody taking that card and using it may be a crime. It may be petty theft, depending on your jurisdiction, right? And there's a lot of different municipalities with a lot of different laws. You think the Bible's got a lot of laws? Try looking at a penal code for any state you live in. It makes the Torah look like a pamphlet. Anyway, where I was going with that is, in several municipalities, there may be a separate law for somebody using your signature without your consent. That could be some form of forgery or a whole other law, right? There's a reason why that blank space is on there for you to actually sign it. So if you have cards that hitherto you have not signed, perhaps you may want to think about signing said card. Tactical tip of the day, practical, tactical. Tactical verse of the day, I've given many so far, but let me close with another one. But as he who called you is holy, you also be holy in all your conduct, because it is written, be holy, for I am holy. You'll find that all throughout the Bible, Old Testament and New. But as he who called you is holy, you also be holy in all your conduct, because it is written, be holy, for I am holy. Kadosh, set apart, different. My understanding of the word holy. With that, men, thanks for listening and have a blessed day.